Thank you, Bob, as well, and Jerry. So first, I just want to offer a bow of gratitude to all of you who have been holding the torch for this kind of long-term, systemic, deep change work that the planet desperately needs. It really speaks a lot about you as individuals and people who recognize that it's not just about personal self-interest, it's about legacy for generations to come. And I feel very grateful to anyone who is willing to work on things that have such a long time horizon. I see our beloved David Madison there, who has been seeding peace work all over the world and carrying the torch for the International Day of Peace in beautiful ways, and others of you have doing each of your own service. So in many ways, what my book, Sacred America, Sacred World, I'm really doing what I can to integrate the best of many different streams of thought. I do not have the depth expertise that Byron or Jerry or Bob really have on designing a system, effective system of global governance. But what I recognize is first of all, that it is a natural, normal, evolutionary outcome that we are heading towards, and that we have to seed that into the consciousness and embrace it as not something that's like, well, maybe we can create it. It is a natural evolution of humanity. We are moving into a global era. We have global internet, global finance, global travel. We have increasingly a global culture, and that we have a global consciousness that is starting to match that we are really starting to care for and be concerned about global issues at a level of depth that historically we never did. So the politics tends to often be a lagging indicator. It's not necessarily out ahead of the curve, and so we can't expect global governance to be something that it surges ahead of where the consciousness of our culture is. But by seeding this concept and beginning to normalize it and seed it in different places, and then also think strategically about how does that gradually, what are the planks that need to get built? We build the bridge from now to this era in which we can abolish war to the dustbin of history, in which we can truly solve our global crises environmentally, in which we can address an uplifting of standards worldwide. But it is going to take some time, and that it is a long game. And so what I want to talk a little bit more about today is less about the destination and more about the strategy from here to there. And I think that's often, from what I perceive, is where things have gotten stalled, let's just say, is that the strategy of building from the current reality into this really desirable future reality all the planks haven't been there. And I think it's important as we think about any sort of strategy about how change happens is that we have to always be kind of looking at a nested series of strategies from very, very short term to medium term to long term. And it involves aligning interests at each level. So like for instance with the Shift Network, I would not have been able to build a company that has 50-ish employees and staff, and we have we've had something like 50,000 customers in 140 countries right now. I had to think about, with each faculty member and each partner, what is going to align our desire, our mission, our greater interest in order to create an online summit, in order to create a course, in order to create there's like mini movements within movements. And in many ways, the global governance it's a meta movement that includes lots of mini movements. And so you have to be able to see the concept slowly into many other movements and build towards what are the elements that are going to align on a short term. That has to happen on a very local, a very short-term local basis, as well as intermediate long term. So for instance, with my book, when I was talking with Byron about this, he wanted to have a more fully explicated argument for global governance in there, and I ended up cutting the chapter down significantly. It's a fairly light touch, and you'll notice, and even the part he read, is that I was speaking into the reservations and the fears and the hesitations, recognizing that at this time the idea of government in general tends to stir up negative associations. And so that you talk about governance rather than government. You talk about problem solvers rather than politicians. and talk about protection from some of the things. Because what happens is we take where we are and we project it out into the future, and then we're going to resist because we see more of what we don't like rather than what we actually need. And so we have to be able to kind of be strategic about the languaging and the positioning and bringing it in there. And it's also one chapter out of, I forget how many I have, maybe 36 chapters in the book. So I'm not putting it as a big foreground thing, but it has a little bit of a Trojan horse quality because there's a lot about, that's very immediate about how do we evolve American democracy right now and go to the next level. And I said, now let's try this on for the long range, let's expand our vision of what's possible, and here's why it's important. So this book has gotten in the hands already. I have pictures of it being given to Hillary Clinton. It's been given, as far as I understand, to Barack Obama. It's been given to, I gave it personally to Michael Steele on the Republican side. I'm building bridges left and right, and I think that's another important thing to bear in mind, that for a true global government, one world democracy to happen, it has to emerge as a desirable outcome on all sides of the political spectrum. It can't just be a left-wing thing or a right-wing thing. It has to ultimately be something that everybody finds as common ground. And so it has to be seeded and developed over time. And it speaks to sort of reeling it back. So what are the prerequisites for us to actually make this a reality? I think there are some changes that can happen in the United Nations, and I think that can get some traction. But I believe that fundamentally we can't see a healthy global governance until we have a healthy governance of the United States. For the simple reason that American democracy is so dominant in the world. We have 37% of the world's spending on military is in our country. We have 22% of the global GDP. We probably have 50% or more of the creative capital, if you will, from Hollywood to technology. It's like we are so dominant in the world right now, in the psychology of the world, that unless America gets fully on board this concept, it's not going to happen. So what does that mean, though? It means that we have to evolve American democracy to the next level. We have to make the current government we have much healthier, much more productive, to take it to the next level. That opens the portal to thinking more seriously about, like, well, how do we do that in a better way globally? Because right now there's such negativity with the Congress ratings as low as they are that people want to pull more power back locally. It's just local, because there's a distrust of power that happens at a distance. So my book is a lot about how do we evolve American democracy and go to what I'm calling a 7.0 operating system. I use the operating system metaphor partially because it fits with what we're used to now. It's like, okay, yeah, we have operating systems and eventually they get buggy and break down, they look outdated, and you have to kind of upgrade to the next level. It's not that we need to overthrow the old or jettison everything. It's like, no, we're building upon what we've inherited. And I go into how I really see there's kind of six major phases, and we're now in a big phase to upgrading to a global operating system. So you notice the title is Sacred America, Sacred World. We're still bridging from the nationalistic consciousness to a global consciousness. So I'm putting them on a par and saying we have to learn to relate to our country in a sacred way, all of the other citizens in a sacred way, and that ultimately the ground of that is learning to treat our entire world as sacred and take care of it. And I think that the sacred element is important because so often the logical reasons for why something ought to happen run into the buzzsaw of emotional fears. And so until our emotional body and our heart are on board with something, we will tend to just repel it, right? So even if it's a very good logical idea for global law and global justice, it's like, whoa, I'm afraid of government. I'm afraid of people who are wielding power in these ways, and politicians are all crooked, and so there's a lot of strong emotional charge around these things, and so those have to be addressed. And so what I'm advocating for in this book is to take it as a different ground of being, a more heart-centered, reverential, love relationship with our country, to bring love into our politics, and actually is a prerequisite, I think, to relating to seeding the kind of politics that can then blossom onto the next natural level. And so that means for those on the left who often are very much stronger in critiquing corruption and American foreign policy and kind of dwelling in this attack mode and all the ways that have been disappointed by American democracy, It means shifting that. Actually, it's like, what can we really love and embrace, and how can we see the principles that underneath American democracy as sacred and holy principles that are leading us to another level of maturity as a country if we take them on. And so that creates more common ground when we can see principles like liberty and equality and justice for all as deep, cherished, sacred principles and honorable, and see what's honorable and noble about our history. That's really important for particularly people who are more aware of the shadow side and the critiques to not forget that, and to because it's like if you have a child, the child grows through love and appreciation, not just through like critiques. And sometimes there's a need to intervene and say, you know what, that's not good. You need to stop that. But if there's not a field of loving appreciation, chances are that child's not going to blossom and it's going to rebel. So I believe we have to relate to America in a more loving way, in a more respectful way, and also to political leadership in a way that's more empowering, supportive, and ultimately creating a kind of field of it being an honorable pathway. Because if we create the climate in which politics is seen as a dishonorable profession, that's exactly who we attract in, and then our politics lags more and more behind where the median consciousness is. Because we're only encouraging the people who are less conscious, who are less concerned for the whole, to go into that profession. So there's a whole rewiring I think we need to do about how we engage politics in a way that is more conscious and ultimately respects political diversity in the same way we've come to respect religious diversity or cultural diversity as well. Right now there's a tendency that we have, because political culture has been very essentially violent ideologically, that it's combat oriented, it's all about assertion and dominance, and people get really, it's hard they get really defended. And so when you're in that defended state, all you're trying to do is make your point. You're not showing your full truth in many ways. And so just like in a marriage where things start to go on the rocks, you kind of start critiquing and going at each other about whatever the perceived problems are. You need to often have like a therapist or some sort of healing influence that helps to soften those divides, stoke the fires of appreciation, reopen the love, and then you can deal with what the problem areas are, but without the same kind of attack and defend strategy. So part of that is what I think is, I have the term political cross-training. We have to get to where we see different political positions as an opportunity for our growth, and that we want to take in the wisdom streams that different value systems represent, rather than simply do battle with them and prove that we are right. And so I'm a progressive Democrat by temperament and nature. It's definitely where I feel most at home. But I traveled to the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention this time, partially because I really was putting these principles into practice. I took time to talk to Trump supporters. I was in the stadium when Trump gave his speech, and I had interesting conversations with people. And I was doing that partially because I spoke at something called the Purple Tent, where we were trying to find the common ground between red and blue values, and I was actually on a panel with Grover Norquist. And it's been fascinating because we had a summit last week, and Grover Norquist was on it, and it's just like in our orbit, it's like people, even with stated principles of finding the higher common ground, people were just like, I can't believe you have Grover Norquist on this side. And it's just like, it's a tribal repulsion. Like, we can't have a conversation now. We have to exclude, we have to say marginalized, we can't have a conversation. I'm saying let's actually open to all quarters. I specifically wanted to have Republican endorsements of my book for that reason, and I've spoken on a lot of conservative radio shows, and I've spoken on conservative TV shows, sometimes in places that are totally, would not normally be the kind of little Marin bubble that we're in here, and sometimes it can be challenging. Now, I'll give you an example. Like I was talking about the rebalancing of the American political culture and really bringing the feminine consciousness and values more into balance with the masculine. And I was on a conservative show, I think in Colorado, and the guy was like, I don't buy that for a second. It's like, I think our culture is getting way too feminine. Men are always getting attacked left and right, and it's like always butt of every joke, everything's about men and he kind of went off for a little bit. And so I had to figure out, okay, where can I find a meeting point? How can I, like using the principles of a keynote, where can I blend with him and then offer something that hopefully will help him shift his opinion a bit. And so I said, I want to first honor that, like, there's a truth in what you're saying, that it doesn't help to denigrate men or the masculine. And we want to bring out what's noble and great and beautiful in men, and that is truly in service. We need the strength and the power, and that doesn't help to denigrate. The gender wars that diminish each other do not help. And we need to extend that also to women as well, that we need to have this balance. Just as in a healthy family, you're going to have a balance between the masculine and feminine elements, and that there's a healthy, loving dance, and that actually leads to a healthy family. And he was totally on board with that. So it kind of just took the critique, and then was just like, okay, you blend with it a little bit. So it's a bit of a dance at times, and you have to become more aware of where our own biases are. Where do we have charge? I took this on as a project way back with, if you want to do an advanced practice, I did it with Sarah Palin, for instance. Really used to be nails on a chalkboard for me. I couldn't even watch her on television. And then I took the time to read both of her books, not just because I was just really doing it as an exercise to humanize her and relate to her with greater respect, and actually be able to see the world through her eyes, and be able to honor that she has the right to have her own opinions, and that we have to create the space for that as well. And it shifted something really deep. And at the end of that, I had a dream in which she was in the dream. She was very friendly in the dream, and we hugged in the dream. It was very sweet. And I actually wrote a blog about this at Huffington Post called Dissolving the Palin Prejudice. And what was interesting is like how much fan mail I got from the conservative side of the equation. Well, a lot of my progressive friends thought I was nuts. But on the conservative side, a lot of people felt like, wow, this made me feel seen and respected in a way I haven't by the folks on the left. And it was an important clue of like, oh, when we're in this combat mode, attacking and critiquing political leaders that we don't like, that we're playing out all of our projections and shadows on, and demonizing them because we're afraid that they're going to make decisions over us that are going to hurt our lives, we're actually doing damage. We're rupturing the relationship with other people, and we're helping to all contribute to this culture where we have a schism between red nation and blue nation, and we're all in these polarized camps. And that doesn't actually lead to progress. It doesn't lead us to be able to get things done. It leads to a gridlock Congress. It leads to dysfunctional relationships. It leads to like increasingly polarized culture, and there's not as much listening. So at the end of that, I really got with Sarah Palin, who for me was like the strongest negative that I had. This practice of saying, what is it that's getting activated in me by political leaders? If I don't deal with that and do some internal work around that, then my legitimate critiques of policies and arguments for why they may not be exactly what we need right now aren't necessarily going to be received, because people are just going to see, oh, he's just another hater, right? And so when you can meet people on their own turf and see something that they may see as well, then a different kind of conversation can open. And so I think this is really important political cross-training to kind of help to make the political culture of the United States more whole, balanced, respectful, and ultimately leading to constructive transpartisan solutions. There's a whole movement of people that are called transpartisan. And transpartisanship doesn't mean you're not progressive or conservative or libertarian or green or whatever you naturally are aligned with, but that you orient to what unites, and to do so in a way that's more respectful, so that the political diversity becomes healthy, that there's a unity at the core that holds the diversity in a way that's constructive rather than destructive. So that's a part of what I think needs to shift for us to go to the next level. I think we also have to look at, as I said, what kind of things, where can we unify with people, even on short-term projects? So, as an example, or maybe not short-term projects, but on medium-term issues that might be across the divide that we don't normally think of. So, for instance, Van Jones, who's a prominent progressive activist, is working with Newt Gingrich on something called Cut 50, which is to reduce prison populations by 50%. Opposite sides of the political perspective, they built some personal bridges. There was also a willingness to find the shared common ground rather than just being in warring political camps to come together. So as all people in this room are committed to some very long-term changes, we have to look for where are those medium-term and short-term bridges that we could work together with people who might be very different than us, And then out of that ground of reciprocity and mutuality, we can actually create something more substantial long term. So that's why I came away from my this panel at the Purple Tent with Grover Norquist. I'm intrigued to go back and say, bone up a little bit on gun issues, because he's on the NRA board, and we ended up having this whole thing around gun issues. And I was trying to figure out, okay, what's the way in with him? How can I, instead of just demonize him, or like, what's the way in? Because he's a powerful player in this culture, and he shapes a lot of things. Is there a place where I might be able to kind of just find a little entry point that could open up some shift around the whole gun control debate? And so I'm interested to explore that, and I think that the more we're curious about that, the more we actually create a wider array of alliances, and those alliances, then we can bring in visionary long-term ideas that might otherwise feel very foreign, or it's just often like kind of la land California, but it's actually just like, oh no, here's something that I want to introduce in. So like with my book, it's like I'm seeding these ideas in there. Thousands of people are reading it, and I've written it in such a way that I'm realistic about where they are right now. I'm not trying to make them take a huge leap to the full spectrum vision of what it is. I feel like that's been articulated in beautiful ways by other people. I don't need to do that. But I'm sort of more about like how do we kind of ease people into things that are the larger systemic shifts. So that's a bit. Let me see. So share a little bit about. So there's a lot of different things I could talk about in terms of how do we evolve American democracy. I think that what I share in the book, there's a way of which, first of all, seeing that there is this higher mission that's coded within the country. You see it in things like e pluribus unum, out of many one. That there's an impulse, or even to create a more perfect union. There's an impulse towards oneness, towards actually embodying more unity within diversity. That is the secret sauce, if you will, of our success. That when we can hold all these different ideologies and cultures and viewpoints in one whole, and then we're grounded in the unity, that diversity becomes creative and generative, and that's part of what's the secret sauce of our entrepreneurship culture. It's the secret sauce on a lot of our creative culture in Hollywood. We're very creative, and creativity demands a lot of inputs. You have to have a lot of inputs, so we have to keep holding this diversity. So e pluribus unum, I think, is a spiritual mission that is charting where we're headed as a country, and it does lead us to say, America, like if you take it seriously, America has a role in demonstrating a healthy global culture in miniature, and a healthy, high-functioning democracy, and that's the bridge into a healthy global democracy as well. So, talked a little bit, let's see what else right now. I think it's worth talking a little bit. In this process of going to the next level, it is important for us to also do shadow work as a country, and not be overly idealistic about who we are, because part of maturation is always integrating the parts of us that we've denied or suppressed, or that are hurt or wounded. And so there's a way in which a lot of the more left-oriented critiques are accurate that we need to deal with, but to do so with more love and more of a unifying spirit. So really doing some shadow work around the genocide of Native peoples, and the legacy of slavery, and the oppression of women, and the ways that we've meddled in and overthrown other democracies and enslaved other countries economically through economic hitmen. There's a lot of that shadow work that needs to be done. But we need to hold the ground of seeing it with more empathetic eyes, rather than just the eyes of judgment and condemnation, which will tend to push us further and further away from the mainstream. So it's like we have to almost see the worst of what we've done as a country with the eyes of love, and with the patience of recognizing that we are maturing slowly but surely. We're growing up, we're getting more mature in different ways. It doesn't always look that way. But if we hold that, it actually creates a different kind of listening, because people tend to wall up when we're heavily criticized, because we don't want to take in a negative projection. So on a national level, if we're just coming in with like, America is full of shit, and it doesn't walk its talk, and it's all like an imperial power. If we come in with that kind of energy, it tends to be repellent to a lot of people who feel grateful for the country, and feel like there's a deep gratitude to be part of the greatest country on earth, which is what most people, the value system most people are living in. And so I think that kind of a more empathetic and less judgmental way of facing our shadows is really important, and just also see what is the promise of doing that work too. Like with indigenous, we've done a lot of work with indigenous peoples, and one of the things I think the promise there is that when we more fully integrate an indigenous worldview, it makes it easier to be more sustainable, because there's a natural reverence for the earth that's more part of indigenous culture than ours. There's a more of a respect for the tribe over the individual. There are things about the patience of the process to align a community rather than just to assert the strong man or woman kind of like directionality, but to kind of get people aligned. That are important principles for us to balance our culture, which is very individualistic and which can be very self-centered as well. That there's a way in which indigenous culture, when we fully honor and integrate it, helps to balance the American psyche. So I think that doing some of the shadow work, looking at like what is the promise of doing the shadow work in different areas, and then getting and that helps us to kind of get more aligned as a culture. So I've been able to speak about things that are somewhat out there with fairly conservative audiences, and if you start with a different ground and a more respectful ground and don't react with things, then it's easier, and there's more bridges that can be built. And then when we can have that different interpersonal ground and emotional, spiritual ground, then it allows us, like Van Jones and Newt Gingrich, to find projects that we can work on that build momentum and energy. So some of those projects have to do with making our democracy healthier too, because until American democracy is really healthy, it's very hard for us to conceive of or want to have a global government, because we haven't mastered national government. We have to demonstrate our mastery at one level before we go to the next. And there is some positive feedback loops of bringing in global governance that can feedback on the national, but there's also a need to say, let's unify on getting the money out of politics. It's very distorting influence, and overturning Citizens United, addressing gerrymandering and the districting issue, which also tends to create more and more polarized constituencies. Looking at things like banking reform, and that doesn't even have to happen at a national level. There's the Bank of North Dakota, which is a public bank, is a great demonstration of a different way to orient around a bank. It operates in parallel with private banks. It seeds a lot of important infrastructure. North Dakota was able to navigate the recession in a much healthier way than any other state in the country. And when the bank is successful, the profits get returned to the people. So it's less government, it's cheaper, it lowers taxes, and it also funds infrastructure development. So we can have a state level. I've seen this with Gavin Newsom, for instance, when he's running for governor next, and I've talked with him at a fundraiser and said, have you looked at the Bank of North Dakota? And talked with him a bit about that. He's like, no, I really need to look into that. So it's like there's these smaller innovations that public banks can be something that unify left and right, and that build us naturally towards a healthy national government, and ultimately have healthy global governance. I also think in the world of peace building, there's a lot that we can do to start seeding cultures of peace, having departments or councils of peace at a local level that help to bring that voice into all government decision making all the way up, because part of the fear of higher level government also becomes fear of becoming more martial and more oppressive, and so we have to, in a way, wean ourselves from more of the excess violence in the system that is built in from things like declaring a war on terror. So I talk in the book about how do we shift our mission up from a war on terror to creating a world of peace, and actually make that the explicit mission of the United States, to create a world of peace. You can still have military engagements that deal with terrorists, but if you're doing so as a subset of work at creating a world on peace, it's a whole different context and a whole different set of relationships that get developed. So it's not polarized of peace versus military, peace people versus military, but we're all working together, including the military, on creating a world of peace. So that's actually, in a way, that's more of almost a different framing, where we're going from, we used to have a Department of War, now we have Department of Defense, and now want to up-level that to the Department of Peace that's designed to create peace worldwide. So I didn't actually get all my notes printed out. My printer was broken, so I just wanted to. Yeah. So there's kind of these medium-term strategies. I think it's important that we also work within the party systems that exist to help them evolve, and outside. I'm interested in both inside and outside change strategies. There's a tendency, I think, to sort of frame it as one or the other, and ultimately real evolution kind of needs to happen both from the inside and the outside. At the DNC, I was very inspired. I spent a lot of time with leaders in the LGBT caucus, and partially serendipitously, but also because I was like, you know, the LGBT community has created deeper, nonviolent, deeper nonviolent change more quickly than almost any other community in the last few decades. And so there's a real savvy about like going from the DNC in 1972 had one out gay delegate, and now there's 700 this time, and there's 28 people who are trans, which was also, to me, is like, wow, that's an amazing shift. And part of it is like working within the power structure, getting positions on platform committees and organizing committees, and there's been a real sophistication of like not just being marginalized, but saying, okay, we're going to kind of work our way in through power structures and systems and help to shift the laws and regulations and work with political leaders. And I think that this kind of a movement, this kind of long-term movement, needs that same level of willingness to sort of suit up and show up. And this is a place where I think like a lot of the Bernie supporters kind of went off the rails and got like so identified with just being outsiders and kind of shouting at the establishment versus saying, hey, you actually have a seat at the table. You have helped to create the most progressive platform in history. Don't just revert back to being outsiders on the street shouting slogans. That's a waste of time and it polarizes people. It's like be insiders as well as outsiders. Be change agents within the system. So I felt very, even though I supported Bernie on, I think there were some ways that the movement kind of went off the rails a bit. It got too revolutionary and polarizing and outside. And there's a way in which you can get hopefully more sophisticated about working both inside, outside to create the changes that are very noble changes that Bernie was advocating for and people rallied around. So anyway, I think that it's also important, I think, to build relationships outside of political cycles. This was a shift I made a few years ago from helping to back people that thought like me and like get excited for Dennis Kucinich or Marianne Williamson to run for Congress, and I backed those people, support them. But then I realized at a certain point that wasn't actually doing a good job as a citizen. Doing a good job as a citizen, being a sacred citizen, means working with our elected officials, whoever they are, and helping them do a better job. Because it's not just about who gets elected, but it's the decisions they make once they're in. We should actually put more time and focus on that than who we're trying to get elected, because ultimately we want for the system to evolve. It's like they need that support and pressure and advocacy from people. They need to be able to go into a committee meeting and say, I've got 22 people who just called me this morning on this issue, and I heard from this constituent with this story. They need stories of like real life stories. Like I heard this from somebody in my district, and those make a really big difference. I got involved with the lobbying on Capitol Hill for the Iran deal, and that was a very charged situation. It looked like a real long shot, but I went to the Friends Committee on National Legislation, which I recommend highly as a great organization that kind of marries a spiritual foundation with really bipartisan peace-building efforts within Congress. And there were 450 people that hit the Hill that day, and they were working on a grassroots level, and it was a close enough thing that without all of those efforts, it probably would not have tipped. And and I think there was a very real danger, and may still be, of Iran being a catalyst for a Middle East war that could metabolize into a World War III. And so I think that's been a very significant stabilizing influence there. So I think we have to kind of find those groups and alliances short term, be working on the things that most people's consciousness is really focused on short-term wins. And so if you want to hold the long view, you got to figure out where the bridge points in with people where they're at, and then you can kind of seed and plant the idea for going somewhere further. But it has to be kind of more gradual over time, I find. And then when we do the kind of medium-term work, that's when we start looking at how do those larger systems shift. So these deeper systemic reforms of our democracy, starting to I've been getting this whole intuition around helping to catalyze more of an indigenous council of the Americas. There's like as a permanent structure that could kind of precede some more a deeper level of unification on the North and South and Central America. There's a way in which helping some of the regional blocks come together and more global accords, more global exchange, this softening of humanity's heart to other people of other religions. Particularly, I think in the next 4 years, it's going to be very important for us to do some real healing work with the world of Islam right now, because that is the divide that could ignite into a World War III. And so we're sending a group of people from our company and allies to Iran as a tourism trip in November. We're thinking about doing a Sufi summit, focuses more on Sufi mysticism as a kind of unifying point. And and I personally try to make loans via kiva.org to develop to women entrepreneurs in Islamic countries. It's sort of one of the things I like to do as a way to send signals. So there's a way in which each of us can think about how do we soften those divides, how do we cross those divides, and so in general, I think that to play the long game, you got to cross a lot of divides. You got to be willing to meet in a very human way people that might normally feel like adversaries. Like I was with Grover Norquist, and I'm just like, I'm convinced I will eventually get something good to happen with Grover Norquist. And so you have to have that kind of mentality rather than just being armchair on the sidelines. Like get in there. It's like, and so I was talking to people on the street, Bernie supporters. I was talking to people in the DNC, and I did the same at the Republican National Convention too. So I think that you never know where a potential alliance could get traction. And so in terms of timelines, I think it's really important to be involved in this election. It's a real pivot point election, so I strongly encourage you to be engaged and to be actively engaged in a way that's also healing, because right now the level of polarization is so extreme that there needs to be more people who want to be a unifying voice. It doesn't mean you don't have a candidate, you don't advocate for that candidate, but can you do so in a way that's respectful, that helps uplift the conversation, that helps build bridges across divides. And like I've been trying to do with a lot of conservatives this year, even though I'm a very active Democrat. So to be engaged in the short term and see the relationships wherever you can, where you start to build connection points into people who could be allies on other short-term projects, whether it could be a peace-building initiative or it could be something around, it could be getting books out even. It's like that when the time is right. It's like this book has been a good change mechanism. People often get inspired by it and say, oh, I want to get this to so-and-so. So I've signed copies to Justin Trudeau. I know that the British political leaders who've gotten them, that I gave them to Cory Booker and to Howard Dean. And so I'm just kind of seeding it in a lot of different places. Gavin Newsom has a copy. I don't know how many have read it yet. They're pretty busy people, but at least it's like, this is sort of a little bit my way to get in there and seed some concepts and a more unifying spirit in a season that's very, very polarized right now. And so to be a non-polarizing champion of what you want to see and to demonstrate how to engage politics in a more conscious and evolutionary way is, I think, very important. And then in the medium term, I feel like there's a lot of the healing of divides. Global governance can't really happen as long as we're so suspicious and fearful of the other. So opening to a deeper exchange between Islam and the West, I think, is really important. I'm thinking about where else can I travel, build bridges, sort of look at other ways that could be helpful to softening some of those divides. And also some of our online work, we're doing that, but you can have your own way to do that. And I think that on the long-term horizon, I want to invoke that the global governance is happening by about 2050. That's what I have in my mind. And I think that there's a couple of reasons why I think that that'll probably be on the sooner side of when it can happen in a really substantial way. I feel like the rebalancing of the culture, of the political culture on masculine and feminine is very important. And so right now we're headed towards more or less about a 2050-ish, where it's about half and half in American political culture. I think that there's a way in which we will have also gotten more fully off of fossil fuels, which are a real distorting influence, and so we're going to be much more tipped over into the sustainable economy, which actually lessens the pressure to be kind of involved in other people's business to protect our own oil supply. And I think that, so there's a lot of stuff in moving the green field forward that's important, the whole sustainability field and renewable energy and electric cars. And I think that we need to also have demonstrated progress on a lot of different fronts. It doesn't mean we can't make progress on the overall vision, but if we kind of have a more patient timeline with it, it could happen earlier, but it also, what I find is sometimes if you see the possibility of something very far off, it doesn't immediately trigger a pushback, because it's sort of like, well, that's impossible. If you said, oh, I think we need to have a healthy global democracy by 2025, people are like, no way. It's like we've got 40% of the world that's still under authoritarian rule, and so I think there's a shift on a national level to more and more democracies. There's a shift into more regional collaborations. There's a balancing. I think we can make some progress on different global accords, perhaps UN reform. I think those are great ideas. But to kind of see it as a little more of a piecemeal build while holding a long-term enough vision that speaks to where people's fears are around government. That is, we want to create a healthy, limited global governance. In my book, I say less than 5% of the total decision making. It's not like this is going to make all the decisions. It's like we want to have a little bit of global governance. We got to have enough at the national level and bring as much power locally as we can really best deal with locally. So it's a balance of local and global. And when you language it in that kind of way, it tends to lead to a different kind of reception than the kind of one world government immediately triggers people's visceral fears and antipathy towards government and oppression and fear of militarization and a lot of other things. So that's probably enough rambling for me. What do you think? So, all right, so happy to take questions, engage. You have anything framing you wanted to say?
Just want to thank Stephen and ask everybody to give them a round of applause. I saw a lot of people shaking their